Hi everyone. Now it's a chance for me to do my presentation. So I'm going to talk about blending GA4 enhanced events with GTM auto events. So I'm just going to, you'll probably notice this talk has a particular flavor or theme. I'm a massive Marvel fan, so you'll probably spot that throughout this presentation. It's a really quick bit about myself. So I'm Analytics Director and Founder at Measure Minds. So we're a leading digital agency, and I've been actively involved in the community as a top contributor. Obviously, we're a Google partner, and also we've done lots of Cookiebot and OneTrust setups, and very involved in Measure Camp, and I've even got a Google Tag Manager book on Amazon. So I've been doing this stuff for quite a while. The things that we focus on are really the Google stack, so GTM client side, GTM server side, BigQuery, Looker Studio, Google Optimize for up until September, and obviously GA3, GA4 migrations. And here's some of the clients that we work with, and they tend to be larger clients, so big beasts, global rollouts, complex, interesting sort of setups. So, bit of background noise there. My fun fact is I ran in the Bristol Half Marathon in a sumo costume. So it was a little while ago, probably in a bit better shape then, but a great fun and bit different. That also kind of ties in a bit with what I want to talk about today, and why I'd want to combine or standardize and improve the GTM auto event library and the GA4 library. So here's a good example of the problem. So here we've got a click listener, and we've got a GTM listener attached to that, a Facebook event attached, and also a GA4 event attached. So in effect, three things are all listening for the same bit of information, and not great. It's going to cause JavaScript bloat and slow down client-side execution. And that becomes an even more a problem when you start adding other types of listener. So the goal here is it possible to standardize and consolidate those listeners? So that's what I started going through as part of this kind of case study or exercise, and I'm going to share my learnings from that. So I'm just going to cover what are auto events and enhanced events briefly. Go through the aim of this, which was to simplify GA4 enhanced events listeners, but also get the benefit and power of GTM auto events and their customization features, i.e. best of both worlds, and optimize site speed. The problem is, having gone through that process, I hit a bunch of issues and bugs and unexpected problems. So what I've come up with is three possible solutions. There's a solution for large sites, a solution for small and medium sites, and then a solution that hopefully will be suitable or available in the future. And then I'm going to share my takeaways and my GTM template library. That will be in a resource pack that we're going to send out at the end. So what are auto events, and also what are enhanced events? So in Google Tag Manager, you might recognize some of these. So you've got your click listeners, your link listeners, element visibility, form submit, scroll tracking, YouTube, HistoryChange, etc. In GA4, you've got very similar things. So the majority of these exist in both. The only slight difference is that form interactions have a start form as well as a form submit, and JavaScript errors, they don't exist because they're interactive. There's not such a thing as non-interactive events in GA4. And the timer has now disappeared. Well, it exists as a 10-second timer on a next page onwards, but it's not something you can configure. So when I talk about auto events and enhanced events, I'm really referring to these two types of listeners, be it Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics 4. So why would you want to turn on or utilize auto events or enhanced event listeners? Well, the obvious reason is it makes the stats look better. So your bounce rate and time on site are going to be more accurate and thus better. Also, it's easy to enable on especially on GA4, you literally go tick, 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 and they're activated. And in GTM, you can import a template of triggers and tags and activate them very quickly. So it's great for marketers in the sense you don't need development skills to be able to utilize these features. And crucially, they help you with tracking of conversions, such as a form submit or a mail to or tap to call. So very powerful, very useful. No reason why you wouldn't want to use them, and that's partly why GA4 has made it easier to enable them and turns them on by default when you create an account. It's probably worth just a little bit of a step back and just work out how we got to auto events, and that'll also explain a bit about why some of these problems exist with them. So a long time ago, in 2012, Stefan Hamill, who's obviously speaking earlier today, produced GA add-ons, which was then consolidated with GAS, or Google Analytics on steroids, by Eduardo. Eduardo happened to then go off and work for Google, and his code was then contributed to AutoTrack, which was a Google kind of extension or plugin script. Not necessarily in sequence here, but roughly after that, GTM auto events launched with click listeners and link listeners and form submit. There are two versions of that. There was V1 GTM auto events and then V2. Interestingly, Facebook started to realize actually just having a Facebook page view is not enough. It wants to also detect other activity that users are doing, also read information about the page, metadata, data layer elements, etc. So Facebook also turned on their kind of equivalent to AutoTrack, which is called AutoConfig, and that's enabled by default. So that was what the click listener that you just saw earlier. And then obviously in 2020 we got GA4 enhanced events as part of GTAG.JavaScript. So that pretty much kind of takes us up to where we are today. But you'll notice that the timescales there, it's not something that was suddenly created, and Google have not been brilliantly quick kind of updating or adding new features to auto events. So the community generally has moved a bit faster with these extensions and add-ons. But Google has the advantage of making it very simple to enable and enable at scale. So what we're really trying to achieve here is combine the simplicity of GA4 enhanced events with the power of GTM auto events and things like CSS selectors, HTML5 elements, and just basically tracking anything that needs to be done as part of a custom setup. So if you're able to do both of those, combine simplicity and power, then you end up with an optimal setup, i.e. an iron spider in this case. And going back to Avengers Endgame, it was kind of like the instant track kind of mode, as in one click, just set it up all for me sort of thing. Now, it sounds like it should be simple and straightforward to just enable all these features and get them to talk easily together. Unfortunately, it's not. So I started this process of actually thinking that GA4 is obviously the way ahead. GA3 is being deprecated. So it makes sense to tap into the GA4 data layer that these enhanced events output. So that's what I did here. So I piggybacked those outputs of things like scroll, link click, file download video, and forms. And I just mapped them to the equivalent of the GTM outputs. So that looks something like this. So here's an example of a video listener. So this one's listening for the GA4 video listener, and then it's converting the GA4 data layer into a GTM YouTube listener. So this is an exact the output is identical in this instance. However, there are a couple of small issues on this one. GA4 doesn't track a 90% video play. Also, there's no pause, seek, and buffering. Those are not the end of the world. They're not critical issues. Although if you do have YouTube running on a background as an autoplay, you can't disable it in GA4 unless you use GTM server side and you block the background video on server side. So not that many sites are going to be using a YouTube video as a background site. So I'm going to mark that one as green. That's fine. We can work with that. On outbound clicks, again, same method. So here I'm listening for the link click. Now there's not a click only event. There's only a link click in GA4. So not ideal there. We don't have that other listener to map to, but there are elements here that are exposed, which is great. However, we don't have the click selector itself. That's not exposed. So if I'm trying to read elements of a link for HTML5 attributes, or actually to use GA4 for CSS selectors, I can't because the click element's not exposed. That's a real shame, and greatly limits the functionality I can get out of GA4 link listeners. Furthermore, yes, it's the element mode.element. That's the value that's not exposed, rather annoyingly. So that one's kind of an amber, really. It's not really great, but at least I can get most of what I need apart from this click selector. File download is very similar, although there's some slight nuances with the file name. Technically, it should have a / which is it doesn't. Okay, so one that we're just going to cover again, going for the Marvel themes here, is scrolls. GA4 obviously does a 90% scroll natively, which is great. However, if you want to if it's a very short site or a short blog or short form content, or you want to combine a scroll with like a 15 seconds delay or something, you don't have control over those scroll thresholds, which is not ideal. We normally also go for a 75% scroll when we set up GTM, where it's defaulted to 90, which is right at the end of the page, which is not great. So that one's kind of really a bit of a red because of the lack of control over that one. And then also for the timer, there is the 10-second timer in GA4. So it's 10 seconds plus a second event, like a next page or a closed tab. Unfortunately, though, when you do an engagement event or a user engagement event for this 10 seconds, it's not pushed into the data layer. You see a kind of event attached to the GTM initialize event, but there's not an actual other event that's pushed, and there's not a data layer field that I can tap into. So this one's basically not possible. A bit like Batgirl, it got cancelled. So it would be great if this value was exposed. It's not, so I can't map that to GTM because it's just not exposed in JavaScript. And then also we're starting to get bigger problems here. So with forms, forms were listening for any form posts. So this could be a Facebook pixel that is sending the pixel as a post request, not a get request. So you get this fake form submit. Which the problem is, normally in GTM you'd say, oh, just ignore any forms posted to facebook.com, they're false positives, but there's no control over GA4 form submits. You can't exclude a form URL, and also there's no way of adding a 2-second delay which is part of GTM. So bit of a big red fail on that one, and we actually recommend turning off the GA4 form submit listener, just because it auto fires as soon as you have a Facebook page view active, and most sites have got a Facebook pixel on there. So generally I say don't use this one. It's not great, and I wish Google would fix the big bug with form submits. I've told them so many times, but unfortunately it's not been fixed yet. And this kind of brings me on to some other issues here. There's quite a long list of red and critical stuff and amber stuff with GA4 enhanced events, which prevent me from kind of doing the mapping for those to GTM. Now there's a file which I can share afterwards with more detail about those, but the two that I would say the critical one is the form submit, and the second one is exposing that click element. And there's some other small issues with outbound clicks, file downloads, and actually the file download one, there's a comma that's been added in the wrong place in GTAG.JavaScript, which is really an obvious typo again, which not been corrected. So we've got these issues with GTAG.JavaScript and some of the data from these listeners not exposed. So we can't piggyback those. What do we do instead? So having gone through this process, I had to rethink what's going to be a better solution to consolidate these libraries, improve site speed, and also retain good data collection. So that's where we need a kind of Big Bertha solution. So what I actually ended up doing, which sounds counterintuitive, is actually just supercharge GTM and depower GA4. So I actually ended up setting GA4 to just the basic page view, and then setting GTM to push all the GA4 enhanced events. So the data is identical, but it's just using GTM as the listener. Let me kind of show you how that looks. So here, this one's doing GTM to GA4 mapping. So here we've got a scroll events as a trigger group. We've got a link click, YouTube video, form submit, that HistoryChange events, and these all then push into a generic GA4 event, which then obviously gets digested and shown in the interface. So here we've got a video. We get everything exposed in here. These are directly mapping. Sometimes I recommend outputting event underscore category, but you can also add the fallback if you use a different naming convention like event category with camel case. So that's supported. It's not shown in this example, but it is in the template, which I'll share afterwards. So again, outbound clicks, this works as expected. And crucially here, we get the click element exposed. So we've got full control over CSS selectors and HTML5 attributes for CTA tracking, which is great. File downloads all work as expected. Again, full control. You'll notice when I've done this, in order to, I'm outputting the same event name that GA4 uses, in this case, file download or click or video start, stop, etc. But I'm adding a data layer field called JavaScript listener GTM. That's done intentionally so that if GA4 auto events ever get turned on by accident, there's not two events that get fired. So they don't mix with each other. So that's an intentional safeguard that I added in this process. The other one is obviously HistoryChange. Now, this one's a little bit borderline. The reason, though, we do recommend running HistoryChange in GTM is that you can't do exclude parameters in GA4, or at least not easily in the interface. So if you've got email addresses or PIIs and you need to clean them on the page underscore location as part of a HistoryChange kind of push, especially on a single page application site, you have to use GTM to do that process. So because PII is a massive problem, we went with the safest possible option, which is to do it via GTM. And in here, you'll notice, actually not on this one, but on the next one, on pushState, we've got a page URL cleaner where we purge all PIIs, and we actually use a whitelisting approach where we say only allow all these parameters that we know are valid, like UTM tags, GCL IDs, etc. And also we purge and clean the referral URL as well. So that's something that GA4 enhanced events don't do. And again, in the interface, there's no exclude param. So this is a really useful safeguard. And then the last one here is popState. I've got to try and get those jokes in there somewhere. So, okay, and again, going back to scrolls, now we do them via GTM. The key thing here is we get complete control. So we can set any scroll thresholds, do trigger groups, and combine scrolls and timers. So like this, for example. So awesome, super cool. the timer itself here, again, we've got full control in GTM on this one. So no action kind of the reason I've put no action required on this one is we can't actually stop the timer or user engaged event in GA4 because there's no setting to turn it off. So there's nothing I can do here. There's not a toggle to disable it, unfortunately. So we can't turn it off, thus we don't need to send it via GTM. With forms, we've got the form submit listener. Obviously, GTM doesn't have a form start listener, which is the only probably one thing that GA4 kind of does, but everything else we get exposed in here. And yeah, so just to note that 10-second heartbeat not exposed in the data layer, so we have to kind of leave that one as an exception. I've left internal site search still run via GA4. The only reason for that, it's really simple to kind of manage it in the interface, but the if lowercasing of site search is important, or zero results found tracking is needed, or site search categories modifying those are needed, or if there's any dots in the query parameters which GA4 doesn't support, then internal site search should also be done via GTM. But I've left it out for the moment just for simplicity. So that's a quick summary of the technical things you need to do, and if you're going to go through this process of going for the Big Bertha supercharge your GTM account to send those GA4 values and improve site speed and consolidate. The reason the other big benefit of why Google is using kind of GA4 auto events is because it's kind of a one click to enable everything, and it really standardizes the data collection in the same way that Facebook is standardizing its data input and digestion. And that standardizing and reduction in number of variations and kind of deviating from the standard way is a good thing when it starts coming to building out dashboards, reports, and understanding the context of data. So especially from small sample sets of data. So another good example of data standardization is Firebase, which does fixed hooks for the names of events and the parameters for events. So that makes things really easy to build dashboards and explore reports from, because it's always going to be using the same names for stuff. The problem GTM in some ways has, GTM is almost too flexible, because the names of variables can be anything and the names of events can also be anything. So Google's kind of unfortunately given us marketers too much power and that too much flexibility, which I mean, the default variables help to some degree, and triggers v2 help to standardize a little bit, but I kind of wished Google would do more to standardize things like a GA4 event ID or a double click ID or a Google Ads ID. They don't have fixed built-in variables for those, and it's really easy to get things like consent mode set up incorrectly because of the order in which stuff fires. And also with the GA4 config tag, there's instances where that can accidentally be fired twice with two page views, etc. So that's important, because there's going to be, probably after the 1st of July, I think everyone's kind of expecting Google to introduce some form of improvements to intelligent events and AI insight on analytics. It's kind of a natural and obvious progression, especially given the investment in Bard. So I did a quick test on here. So I said, please connect to Google Analytics and give me a summary of best performing campaigns. And then the key thing is action those suggestions to improve my CTA. So this is kind of what things are probably going to move towards, is the ability to authenticate your Google Ads and your Google Analytics account, and use the context of your data plus benchmarking data plus machine learning and predictive analytics, and to basically come up with here's what you should do, and just click the button to do it. So this is going to be a super cool thing. It's just, I think Google needs to get everyone on GA4 to potentially allow these sort of advancements to happen. I want to just give one mention to narrative science, an old tool from the past, which kind of started some of these intelligent insights. So it's not necessarily a new thing. It's just getting everyone on the same infrastructure to allow it to be enabled at scale. The only key thing I would say about it is, and this is why I keep coming back to standardized data collection, is that if the data input is wrong, it can lead to the wrong output. So a good example of that was Microsoft Tay, which was a kind of a chat bot similar to a ChatGPT that was trained on Twitter data, and it started digesting Trump tweets and unsurprisingly started coming out with some really weird responses to chats and questions and a really bad bias. Here's a good example of that here. This was an account that was suddenly linked to Firebase and it had GA4 running, and it said, great, like the intelligent alert said, you've now got 600,000 more screen views. Well, that's because Firebase has just been connected. So obviously a false positive there. I can see why it thought that, but it didn't have the historic data and in some ways the user input to say ignore this one, red flag it, it's not a valid suggestion. This would eventually get fixed and better over time as users who are using GA4 provide feedback, and it gets that feedback plus kind of usage data. Think of almost the trackers of trackers, as in a bit like with the recapture images, where we have basically trained Google to be very good at detecting pictures of fire hydrants and traffic lights or cats. That's kind of what's in essence using the GA4 interface is going to be training it on what is good and what needs to be improved. So I'm conscious of time here, so we're almost 30 minutes. I'm going to summarize what I think you should do in terms of next steps. So if you are a massive site, so a global player, and you need a global rollout, so I'm talking like hundreds of GTM accounts, my suggestion to you would be go with the Big Bertha mode. So supercharge the GTM account, depowered the GA4 account by basically moving listeners from GA4 over to GTM, but outputting the same data layer. So you're not losing any data layer or data input. It's kind of on. It's a bit like putting GA4 in training wheels mode or very basic mode, page view only mode. Now this requires a little bit of a technical setup and technical knowledge to do. So I'd only suggest this on large sites. If it's a medium or small site, I would say go with the simplest possible option, which is use GTM auto events, as you probably are, and turn on those GA4 enhanced events, because it's easy to manage, with the exception of the form interaction one, which is just completely full of bugs and shouldn't really be available. The third solution is really a kind of a one for to be confirmed in the future. Now, obviously, we've had Google I/O last week. There's been no announcements or updates to GTM probably for almost a year or so now. So I'm hoping Google's going to switch over, once they've fixed GTAG.JavaScript bugs and issues, to really investing more in GTM.JavaScript. There's a bunch of other listeners that I would like them to enable and some features that I would like to see. I'm hoping it's just a temporary thing, and we're going to get back to normal. Using GTAG as your primary is probably at some point going to be a good solution once these bugs are fixed. However, there are still quite a few bugs to fix in GTAG.JavaScript. Here's my list of at least 12, and there's a few others kind of in there as well. So the good news for GTM, thankfully, and me being a massive GTM advocate, is GTM's not going anywhere at the moment, thankfully. Few. and Tony Stark might exist in a different universe. He's not been killed off. He's going to come back, which is going to be great. Maybe as ultimate Iron Man, we'll see. So my question or request for the audience is we need to kind of make Google aware of some of these issues with GTAG.JavaScript and GA4. There's not really a great way in the interface of reporting JavaScript issues. There's the little feedback box in the bottom navigation, but it's really only for issues or bugs in the interface. So for JavaScript, I would suggest sending a tweet to Google Analytics. So that's what this QR code does. If you scan that with your mobile phone, or if you're on desktop, go to bit.ly/GA4 bugs, all lowercase, click send on that. And hopefully, if someone's listening to the Google Analytics account, they'll pick that up. Obviously, if they don't know about these issues, they're not necessarily going to fix them. So the more noise, the better. And also, the more problems and bugs there are with GA4, the more likely Google is to maybe delay. I don't know. We're kind of 30 days away or so. So if they realize that maybe they've missed a lot of stuff, maybe they'll move the deadline. We'll see. Doesn't hurt to try and make them aware of issues with the current plan. If they stick to the current plan and GA3 is purged, then it's going to be a kind of interesting world. So hopefully I've taught you something useful there about how you can utilize best of both worlds with GA4 enhanced events and GTM auto events and get the two to work together. Massive thank you for to the team that have been helping me with this event. And that's my twin brother there on the left. That's me in the middle. And I had to put a photo of Jono in here because apparently he's my triplet. So if you've got any questions, if you scan that QR code, it will take you to, it will show you my LinkedIn profile. So just click connect on that or send me a message on LinkedIn. Other small request, cheeky-ish sort of request. So obviously Google Analytics 4 doesn't have the ability to import GA3 data. So you can't do backfills, and the same with BigQuery. BigQuery is only going to start collecting from the date you hook up GA4 to BigQuery and add payment details and connect to a project. One really good way around that would be if Google went off and bought, let's say, an e-commerce provider like Shopify, because then they could join that transactional user and product data with the web data to basically enrich the two, and it is then going to have all the past transactions from Shopify. So this would be a great way of solving that problem. And given that the machine learning is all about data, and you've seen on Google Ads, it needs enough conversions to reach statistical significance and have a reliable solution for kind of like AI bidding on like Performance Max and similar. So if it doesn't have the data, it can't make the predictions and it can't improve the campaigns and come up with suggestions. So I would say this would be a clever buy for Google. So again, if you want to tweet this link and ask Google to buy Shopify, I think it would be a good plan. Also, just a shout out for our free GA4 migrator tool. So if you're on if you're using GTM and you haven't migrated to GA4 yet, and you've got a bunch of event tags in GA3 that you need one-click migrating, we've got a free tool that does it. It's super powerful. Please check it out. Also cleans up the GTM account and adds about 18 auto event listeners, some of which are mentioned in this presentation today. And also just as a final kind of takeaway, I'm gonna if you want access to the sort of tag library, I'll send through the slides on here and just click on the hello at and send a blank email to hello@measuremindesgroup.com, and I'll add you to the template list that I maintain. And we've still got a few minutes left. So in terms of once the bugs are fixed, what do I think Google should be working on next? I think for me, I wish they had HTML5 video tracking as a native solution rather than custom HTML. A geolocation listener would be great. Also, push notification listener would also be really handy. And I think the community templates are really missing review scores, user reviews, change frequency, in the same way that Drupal, for instance, modules, you get the number of installs, you get an indication of usage, and if something is maintained or not. The other thing I think is really missing from GTM is I wish they had a marketplace so that you could like buy third-party plugins and incentivize developers to build stuff on top of GTM. But again, we kind of need that safety that investment as GTM is going to happen to make it a valid use case to start building paid plugins on a community template library. And then the other one, which is really obvious, but I'm amazed that it hasn't been baked into GTM, is an ability to link GTM to GA4 in the same way that you can link GTM to DoubleClick, which is native, and also linking GTM to Google Ads. Again, there's not a way of connecting one GTM backend to Google Ads backend. It desperately needs that connection in order to be able to do clever integrations between, let's say, going into Google Ads, creating a version, pushing it into GTM, and deploying a trigger automatically when a conversion is added. There's not that seamless integration between those Google products, and I kind of wish there was. So that's it for my talk. I hope you found this useful and interesting, and gonna open up to questions.